podcast. Whoops, this meeting's being recorded. That's kind of late on the uptake there, Zoom. We do a podcast we're coming up on our 200th episode, so it's been every single week for 4 years. That the archives are up on that, so you can look back at old ones if you're a newer farmers market manager. If you're a current market manager, tune in. It comes out every Monday. Lots and lots of topics there. It's hard to believe you could come up with new topics every week for 4 years, but we never run out. We do a lot of interviews with farmers market managers and other people in the industry, farmers and vendors, policymakers, and we also do some kind of operational tips that just the three of us contribute to. As you know, you have a job that is endlessly complicated. Our job is weird, it says on our buttons that we pass out at the conference, so there's always plenty to talk about. So today what we're going to talk about is we offer online classes that help farmers and vendors get started at markets and create successful businesses. So what we're going to talk about today is how the application process can help you fill your markets with successful businesses. And as the little instructive screen that Amanda had up says, happy to take questions throughout the presentation. I'm going to share my screen. What's on the screen is just kind of a guideline and an outline to what we're doing. It's not the most important part. The most important part is what we're going to talk about today, and making that a dialogue is really important. So feel free to drop a question in the chat. The only tricky thing about Zoom is that sometimes I can't see the chat at the same time that my screen is shared. So hopefully Amanda or someone will read questions to me if I'm not able to access them. I'm going to try some systems. It seems to work better than others. And then at the end of each section, I'll probably pull my screen down for a minute and let us talk about anything that you want to discuss. You don't have to wait until the very end of the presentation for questions. I'm always happy to kind of carry on a continuing dialogue throughout workshop sessions. A lot of times you'll come up with a question that somebody else is thinking and hasn't really been able to formulate yet. So feel free about sharing your ideas and questions. It's usually helpful to everybody in the group. So we're going to share screen here and get going. And I appreciate you dropping the information on where you're from in the chat. That's helpful. It looks so far like you're not running gigantic markets. I'm not sure who else is on here that might be doing that. But things vary from market to market depending on your size and your number of vendors and things. So that's where questions and comments will come in handy. So let's try sharing and off we go. Ta-da. All right. So there we are. So screening for success is about managing your application process to make sure that you find the most successful vendors, or that you turn vendors who maybe aren't quite ready for prime time into successful vendors. And you can do some of that throughout the application process. You can do it by adding education to your program as you go on. We talked about who I am. That's easy to find, and I'm easy to find online. So feel free to reference that when you want. So what we find in putting together farmers markets is that so many farmers are passionate about what they do. They're there because they're trying to hold on to land that's been in their family for a long time, or they're there because they've dropped out of the rat race and want to do something more tangible, something that they feel brings meaning to their lives and their communities. They get taken in by a health issue and then learn to grow their own food to help that. So there's all kinds of passionate reasons that farmers farm. And food makers and the other vendors in your market are the same way. They're sharing a recipe that's been passed down in their family, or they've got a child that's got an allergy issue and they've figured out how to make an amazing product that services that. They come in really excited about what they do, and our job as market managers is to take that passion and turn it into profit, because they can't keep doing it unless they can do it and make a net on it. So very few small farmers and food makers tend to have business and marketing knowledge. And that's where a market manager can be so important during the application process and on an ongoing basis, to help them take those things that they're so passionate about, and we call it passion meet profit, turn it into a business that can sustain them and their families, and that can stay in business long enough to enhance your market and to provide opportunities to your shoppers to buy what they're offering. So it's important for everybody that you evaluate the vendors that you're bringing in, so that the balance of your market keeps people successful, and so that the people you bring in have the potential to succeed, because successful farmers and vendors equal successful markets. We've talked to vendors all day, every day. We have an extremely large market in addition to a couple of smaller ones that we operate in San Diego County. It's our oldest, biggest market is known for being very successful. A lot of people want to jump into that. We sometimes direct them to smaller markets first, and we'll have people say, it doesn't matter that you've got a lot of the same things. My brownie's better than anybody else's brownie. I'll sell plenty. Don't worry about it. We do worry about it because vendors that pop in and out of markets make shoppers nervous. They make other vendors and farmers nervous, and they don't do themselves any favors getting into a market where they're not going to make a living, where they're not going to show a net. So we try to be really careful about who we bring in for their sake and for the sake of the market as a whole. Successful vendors is what we're looking for. I had a guy comment a few days ago and say, well, I'm willing to pay your fee. What else matters? Well, a lot else matters. What matters is that I've got a balanced market so that I'm not oversaturating a category where I've already got successful, happy vendors. What matters is that my shoppers keep putting their faith in me, that I'm vetting who we bring in, and that what we bring in is not full of artificial ingredients, and that it fits kind of the theme of our market, which is healthy and local and food that's good for you. It matters to the other vendors and farmers to not see people popping up and then leaving. So everything that happens in your market affects everybody participating in your market. So it's really not just about the fees. And sometimes potential vendors in particular don't actually understand that. We can explain it to them. It's okay to reveal that secret. It matters to us that they're successful, and that's who we want in our markets. And once they understand that, generally they're appreciative of the fact that we're not just filling a space to take the space fee. We're filling a space based on the idea that they'll succeed, and that then will add to the success of the market overall. So our application process is extremely codified. We know exactly how we handle each application. We get a lot of applications. It would be interesting to see, so if you have a minute, maybe drop in the chat, whether you're taking applications year round or doing it on a seasonal basis, because that can make a little bit of a difference. And what's interesting to me is whether or not you want new vendors. So I occasionally run across a market, more than occasionally maybe, that will say right on their website, not accepting new vendors. The market's full for the next 2 years. How do you know? What is your goal? Do you want to grow your market? Is your space, do you have such a finite amount of space that you don't have room to add vendors? Do you run a market where you believe that exclusivity in categories is important? And so if you have a tomato grower, you don't want to add another. I'm always interested to hear about markets that don't want applications or that aren't accepting vendors. So any info that you want to drop in the chat about where you are you full? Are you looking for new vendors? Lacking that, I'm going to assume that you're here because you want to know how to evaluate vendors and get more vendors and farmers into your market. So with our application process and strong recommendation, make your needs really obvious. If you are not open to crafters or prepared food vendors, say that on your application. Not looking for hot food, you strictly run a farmer's market that's all about farmers and maybe some value added. Let people know right on the application. There's no good reason to waste their time and your time evaluating an application if there's absolutely no way you would ever accept somebody that's in those categories. So we try to make that really obvious. I'll show you a slide in a second. That's the disclaimer that we put on our application. You have to open that page before you get to the application. You have to check a little box that says you've read it. It lets people know things that we're especially looking for and things that we're absolutely not looking for. That being said, there's a fair amount of people that read that little advisory note, check the box that they've read it, and send us an application for jewelry anyway. We're fairly certain there are only 4 people in San Diego County that don't make jewelry, so we're not accepting any more jewelry applications. We've got enough, even at the big market that has a section of non-food for our tourists and visitors. People will still send you those applications, but at least you've given them a fair chance to save time by not applying if you really and truly aren't interested in what they're making. So make your needs really obvious. Preferably, you've got a system where you can update those fairly regularly because your needs will change during the course of a season and certainly year to year. We take applications online only, and I understand that some smaller markets especially may take an application in person. We like to document the whole application process. That's part of risk management. It's also part of having a shared memory to make sure that what is told to a vendor is remembered by them the same way it's remembered by the manager or assistant manager that's told them something. So we tell people absolutely feel free to chat with us at the market. We strongly recommend you look at the market, take a tour through, get a feeling for the shoppers and the other farmers and vendors before you apply to us. But all of our communication is kept online with an online application, simple to set up. We used to have it in Google Drive, really, really easy to do it that way. If you've got capability on a website, even better. And that application comes in online, and then all of the communication about that application until we get to the sampling process is done via email, so that we've got a clear thread of communication. All of our market managers can access that same email, so we know what one person has told somebody. If you've ever called AT&T or somewhere and they say, oh, I'm looking at the notes on your file. We kind of do that too. We make notes as we talk to people, and you can follow an email chain so that all of our managers and assistant managers are coming from the same place while we're evaluating somebody to join the market. We do that later, even after you're in the market, for schedule changes and requests to add a product or delete a product. We find that it's really helpful to keep everybody on the same page. And then you need to determine whether you're taking applications seasonally or ongoing. One thing I'd recommend to you is, if you're taking all of your applications seasonally and you have a cutoff date that's maybe a couple months before your market opens, but in point of fact, you actually do take applications during the season as somebody retires or they change jobs and have a new day job that doesn't allow them to be at the market, as someone leaves in an essential category and you want to fill it in. If you actually are taking applications throughout the season, make sure that it says that on your website. I've worked with a couple of other organizations recently that are seasonal markets. They take applications seasonally. I've asked them, what do you do if your only fish vendor drops out, what do you do about that? And they say, oh, well, we'll take other applications. But it says very clearly on their website that they don't, and they're wondering why they're not getting applications in that category. So make sure that even if you take the bulk of your applications in a period before a seasonal market starts, make sure that you drop a note in there and say, if you're interested in applying, we may not have a consistent space available this season, but feel free to submit an application. We'll let you know if something changes. If you want applications coming in regularly, it seems very obvious, and it's apparently really easy to forget, that you need to know whether or not people want to apply, and let them know that you're taking applications. It was sort of a secret with this one group. It was like, well, the people who need to know that we take applications. Not necessarily going to open you up to the widest variety of vendors applying. Do we have, so I can see numbers. Let's see if it'll let me look. Oh, it will. Okay. All right. So I can drop the chat in here. Just seeing if we've got questions that we need to talk about. Oh, Sauvie Island. I love that market. Hollywood, great market. That's a decent sized market. Applications year round, but we have a priority deadline in early February. So that's awesome. So you're mostly full at that point, but open to applications to broaden diversity of the market. I'd be interested in knowing, is that clear on your website? Is it clear on your application? Do you let people know that the deadline is early February, but that they can still apply? So good to know. Yes, it's clear on the application. Go Hana. Yay. Gold star. Downtown Coos Bay, 108 approved apps. That's great. 5 incomplete, 6 pending, 82 vendors this week. Okay, so lots of applications. Seasonally, applications mostly online. That's awesome. Thoughts on application fees or approval fees or both? Let's talk about this now. Sometimes you'll pop up a question and I'll say, hey, that's coming up in the next section. I don't have that in here. Good question, though. Something that we turn over in our minds a lot, because as you know, applications can take a really long time to process and to evaluate. We don't charge an application fee. I know organizations that do charge an application fee. PCFMA up in the Bay Area of California, I just realized that on their new application, they're charging almost $200 for an application fee. That, to me, is a lot. Their ongoing fees throughout the year are lower than at my large market. Some of their markets are very large. So I don't know if they're figuring that that's subsidized by the application fee, and then at least then the continuing vendors are paying less because they're pushing off some of what they need to operate in terms of higher rent onto the application process. We do something a little bit different too with a class, and we'll talk about that towards the end of this presentation, that we offer to vendors who are applying who are clearly not ready. to be vendors. And instead of our staff spending a ton of time with those folks, which would necessitate an application fee, we offer an online class that they can sign up for. There is a fee for that. And that takes the folks that have a relatively simple evaluation process. We don't need to charge them, but we do charge people that are going to take a lot of education to get to the point where they're really applying. I'd be interested to see what y'all are doing in terms of application fees. I have not seen anything called an approval fee, but I have seen in many markets a membership fee. So you have to join the farmers market board or association or organization, and you pay an annual fee just to be part of that group. I have seen that many times. That to me would be equivalent to an approval fee, I suppose. If you are in the market, you've got to pay this annual fee every month, every year. $25 application fee goes up to $35 after the priority deadline. That makes sense too. Anything you can do to incentivize people to actually do things on time is always a really good idea. Tell me this, can y'all see the chat on my screen? Am I blocking the visuals? If not, I'm going to leave it up here. Okay, that's great. So Zoom has changed a couple of protocols lately, and I am happy to see that that one is working now, because it's great for me to be able to actually see the chat while we're going. So let's go on to the next slide. This is just a list of the kind of things that we put on our application that people have to read before. They have to go through this. They have to check the box before they can get to the application online. Now, as I said, there are certainly people that glance at this, check the box, close it, and go on to the application without really reading it. But this actually tells people what we're looking for. In California, only California certified producers can apply as farmers. We can't take farmers from Mexico, even though they're 30 miles from San Diego, and the folks in Fresno growing nuts and stone fruit are 400 miles from us. We're allowed to accept those 400-mile away California farmers. We can't accept somebody from Arizona, can't accept somebody from Mexico. So that's a permitting requirement for us. We do just a brief rundown of what kind of permits and things that you would need to have, and point out that if you don't have those, you might want to look at the class. We point out that we don't take informational and promotional vendors except as sponsors, because otherwise we get a million applications from realtors and solar power providers and that kind of thing. We point out that all of our vendors have to have general business liability insurance. That definitely rules out some of the folks that will go to another market where they're not as conscientious about requiring that, but we want them to know up front we can't take a vendor without that. We mention rain or shine about 6 times in our application process, because we want people to know that we want them there whether it's raining or not. I do understand, because we had an employee that came from a Seattle market, that may not be as big a deal for you in Oregon, because in Oregon and Washington, oftentimes people are baffled when they hear that San Diegans hide when it rains, because it rains more often where you are. So we do need to mention that rain does not stop life here in Southern California. We look for local products, we have room, and then we do a little rundown of what we have space for and what we definitely don't have space for. We have certain markets that do not have any more space available in the category of prepared food and beverages, because it's in the restaurant district. We note that we're not taking jewelry or clothing applications right now because we're full, and then we refer you again back to a class. So those are the kind of things that you might want to have on your website or wherever your application lives, so that people just get a heads up. Again, the goal here is to attract vendors, or the people to be potential successful vendors, and also not waste your staff's time and your time with vetting people that clearly just don't fit into the theme and the mission of your market. I'm interested, Allison. It says small fee to cover costs. I'm assuming that's the application fee. Businesses that have existed for 2 years or less only have to pay the fee if accepted. So you're waiving the application fee for really new businesses. Is that true?
Yeah, that's just to encourage new vendor, brand new businesses. And if someone is just a starting out farm or business, sometimes the application fees can be prohibitive if they're applying to more than one place. And so that's
Gotcha.
just a way to encourage some, brand new businesses.
Gotcha. Okay, that's an interesting thought. I like it in some ways. I'm cautious in other ways. Absolutely, we're doing a lot of work right now on trying to make our application process equitable, on trying to bring new people into the market, on making sure that we're not closing out people in different categories who may be lower income and things. At the same time, we get a request sometimes for about our vendor 101 class, and people will say, well, do you give a scholarship on that to low income people? And what concerns me about that, and we say generally not, and then we have a lot of dialogue about why, and then we do occasionally give scholarships to those folks and waive the fee. But part of my concern about that is that if you can't afford a $25 application fee, can you actually finance your business? Can you afford inventory? Are you going to be sufficiently financed to physically get to the market? If your van breaks down, what's going to happen? Only because I have worked with a lot of small businesses, both at farmers markets and in other entrepreneurial kind of consulting levels. And absolutely positively, the main reason for business failure is a lack of funding, is people that you can start on a shoestring, but you do have to have that shoe. And if you're cutting it too tight on the amount of funding that you have to start a business, your chances of being able to maintain that business to profitability are definitely vastly reduced. And I have seen a lot of heartbreak from people that start small businesses and then have to close them, have to fail, and have already invested in establishing that business. So I'm a little bit cautious about encouraging somebody who can't afford some of the basic charges involved in starting a business to keep moving forward. My inclination with them at that point is to maybe talk to them a bit about how they could raise some money. Can they talk to Axiom? Can they talk to a low profit lender, a nonprofit lender? Can they do crowdfunding? Do they have friends and family that would like to invest? And we have a whole section in our Vendor 101 program on how to manage that so that you can still go to Thanksgiving and speak to your relatives if they've invested in your business and it's not going well. So that's just something else to take into consideration. I do like the idea that you're making actual steps to make sure that your process is open to a lot of different kinds of people.
I'll say we've done it for 2 years and it's been pretty successful. And the thought is pretty much that hopefully they'll make that $25 back, you know,
Right.
the,
Yeah,
the first
exactly.
couple of markets, but it's just you know, speaking in terms of equity, not everyone has friends or family who can lend them $25.
Absolutely.
And so I hear what you're saying and I love it. I think for us, it's
Yeah.
just been trying to make the market accessible to as many different kinds of people as possible.
Absolutely. And that's a big topic for us. And there's a lot of aspects of our application process and our market operations that we're trying to figure out right now about that. In our case, it's especially looking at, because we have vendors that just stay with us year after year after year, we don't take a new application each year because we're a year-round market. We just keep going. There is no break in the action. I do know of some markets like that actually make everybody reapply every year. We've never done that. We've had a sense that the folks that have been at the market from the beginning have helped us grow the customer base, and we wouldn't deny them a chance at the market. What that creates, however, is that a lot of legacy vendors and legacy farmers are in the market, and that you run out of room for new people. And so that's perpetuating that inequality and that lack of access. So it's something that's a huge topic of discussion for us right now in our own organization and in things like the podcast and the conference. So really, really good topics to keep talking about. I would not ever claim to you that I have the answer for those. We're still in the questioning stage and exploration. Okay, so basic application information. This is what we've got on our online application, and I'm guessing that you probably have similar things. So business name, contact information. We ask for contact information several ways. We ask for phone numbers. We ask for the phone number again. We ask for the email because we have had really interesting applications from people who have apparently made a typo in their own email or phone number or both, and we haven't been able to find them. So that can get tricky. We try to make sure that they have lots of chances to make sure that that's right. We ask for a website or a social media links. So an Instagram or Facebook page that's associated with the business. We do, and if you're a market manager and have been one for any amount of time looking at applications, we do end up with some social media links to people's Instagrams where there's lots of pictures of their dog, but nothing about their business. We generally go back to them and discuss that. And we ask for those for two reasons. One is that you can find out a ton about somebody's business by looking at their social media. That's where you can get pictures of their product. That's where you can find out how active they seem to be in engaging with people. And that's one more way to get a hold of them if for some reason they've included typos in their basic contact information. We have a box that people check for their category, whether they're farmers, whether they're food makers, whether they're what we call prepared food. And we call food makers what some areas of the country call value added. In California, value added is a specific category for farmers that are adding value to their farm produce. Food makers are people that hold temporary food facility permits or cottage food permits. And then we have what we call prepared food, which some people call hot food. So something to be eaten or consumed, food or beverage on site at the market. We have some real limitations on that in some of our markets because some of our markets are very specifically designed to be grocery stores in restaurant districts that don't have grocery stores. So we really limit the extra dining opportunities. And then we ask for specific products, and we say on our application, and we're clear about it in our ongoing operations. We want to know specifically what you're going to sell. That sometimes generates some questions. Well, if I'm going to sell a salad at this time of year, but I'm selling a salad at another time of year, it's going to have different things in it. Don't have to get quite that specific, but we do need to know that you're selling salads and not sushi. So because we're trying to balance the market and the number of offerings that are available in any very specific category. So we ask for a list of specific products, everything that they'd like to sell. We ask for experience. We have a question on there that says, what other farmers markets or events have you participated in? And we oftentimes get a big list, and oftentimes they have or they have not actually participated in those markets, but they've applied to a lot and they think that counts as have you participated. So that all comes up in the next section, which is some dialogue and digging in. We ask them if there's anything they'd like to tell us about their product, if they have a story. We encourage that. In Vendor 101, we talk about it a lot, that tell us a story about why you're doing this. Are you making these gluten-free products because your daughter has an allergy? And so you discovered this whole line and you wanted to make sure they tasted great. Are you growing strawberries because your family has grown strawberries in Carlsbad for 72 years? Are you, do you have a very small selection of produce because you're a very new farmer on a small piece of land and you're getting started and you're planning to expand as you go? We figure that if they can tell us a good story on their application, they'll be able to tell a story at the market. And that's so key to success. So the reason people buy at farmers markets is not because it's easy to park or because the prices are lower. People buy at farmers markets because they want that relationship with the people that are producing their food. So we know that a market vendor or farmer that can tell a story that has some heart in that business, and it's not that they've just worked the numbers and found out that there's a lot of margin in pickles, is going to make more sales. If they can tell us a story and they can tell customers a story, they're going to be more successful. We ask for their availability. We match that up later. We'll talk about dialogue and kind of digging in and reading between the lines. We ask for whether they have permits and whether they have general liability insurance, and if so, to list that. We tell people in our classes if they don't have it, they can say pending acceptance. We want them to list an insurance agency because we want to know that they're at the point where they've picked one, even if they haven't actually bought that policy yet. So those are the kind of things that we include on our application. Okay, so we got some more information on application fees like that. Scholarships approved often primarily for producers. We're all about anything we can do to get producers started. That is absolutely the name of the game. All of us having farmers aging out. Shauna says, because we're a food desert in California City, we don't charge the farmers an application or space fee to encourage their participation. Farmers are driving 1.5 to 3 hours each way to get to us. Labor of love. I do like that. We definitely work harder with the farmers than we do with anybody else because there's less of them, because we think they're essential, because no farms, no food. So if we're not supporting our farmers, then our food makers aren't going to have anything to work with. And there are just not as many of them to go around. So we definitely, and I can hear it in some of the comments that you're doing the same, we definitely work a little harder, stretch a little farther with our farm applicants than we do with any other kind of applicant. It is, after all, a farmer's market. So then we get into evaluation of our applications. Anybody, we can take a pause for a second. Is there anybody that has questions on what kind of information you should ask on an application? Kind of referring to that last little section. Anybody asking something amazing that is not on that list? Something that we haven't thought of asking? You have a secret weapon?
One thing that we ask for the Hood River Farmers Market is how much the vendor, like what's their weekly sales goal. And we found that really helpful in kind of establishing just like the vision that the vendor has. Cause sometimes they'll say like, oh, like 50, 100 or $200. And then we find they're actually a better fit for like our community table or consignment table.
Great.
And that kind of saves everybody a bunch of time in the application process. And then, so vendors who are also like, I'm gonna make $4,000, which at our market is a little bit out of reach. So then kind of discussing that with the vendor has been helpful too.
That's great. Yeah, that's a really good question. We have, because in our area, almost everybody in Southern California, the farmers markets here, charges a percentage. Not true in Northern California. So it's interesting how different areas work, but almost everybody charges a percentage of sales to the farmers and vendors. Our organization does not. And so we oftentimes get applications that have a whole big rundown about, I'm in such and such market and I bring in thousands of dollars. The idea, I think, being that I know I'm in a category that you don't usually accept, but I can make you so much money, you'll let me in anyway, because they assume that we charge a percentage rent. So it's an interesting question to ask. We might get a little bit different kind of answer because of that. There's a couple of really large markets in the area that will pretty much take anybody that's got a high sales volume because they do work on a percentage. One of the reasons we don't, because we don't want to be influenced by that in terms of balancing the market. But that's a really interesting question. I like that, especially for a brand new vendor. It's good to know what in their mind they're going to make or they need to make, and then match that up with the appropriate market. Really smart. So after we get the application, this is what we're doing to evaluate to make sure we're ending up with successful vendors. The first thing we have to look at, of course, is do we have a space available? So everybody's got a finite amount of square footage on the ground, or most of us do. And in some markets, we just don't have any space, or we have 2 10-by-10 spots open, but we know that those need to be dedicated to farmers. And so we don't have space for anything else. We know, because we use a whole matrix to kind of balance our markets, we know if we have space available for baked goods at this point, or if we've got too many in the market. So the first thing we're looking at is, do we have space available? We take samples from all of our vendors before we accept them to the market, and we kid about, we've got one person in particular on our team that has a real sweet tooth, and she will ask for a sample from anybody, whether we have space available or not, as long as they've got cookies or cupcakes or something along those lines. But it is a joke. We don't actually do that. The first thing we look at is it possible for us to even give this person a space? And if it's not, at that point, part of the, and we've got a little section coming up on letting them down gently, but part of the conversation we'd have if we just don't have space in that category is, we don't have room at this market, we may have room at this market, or if we don't have room at any of our markets for a particular category, we'll sometimes suggest to them a newer market that has opened in another community in San Diego County, somebody else that might be good for them, sometimes with non-food vendors, because we limit that category pretty heavily. We'll suggest to them a couple of makers markets that sell once a month, and places that might work better for a craft, kind of a straight off jewelry, not food related craft, somewhere that might be good for that. So space available is obviously the first thing that you've got to consider. Differentiation, key, of course, when you're trying to balance a market. So if you've already got 4 people making hard crust breads and you've got another application for 1 more, that's probably not where you want to devote that space. You're probably going to look for somebody that makes scones or quick breads or a sliced bread or something entirely different from baked goods, like jam, or one of the wonderful things that can go on a baked good. So differentiation is important. Every vendor that comes in, of course, thinks that their juice is better than anybody else's juice. But if I've already got 4 juice vendors and I have X amount of space devoted to juices, doesn't matter. It has to be different, not necessarily what they consider better. So it's got to be a completely different kind of thing. We actually have 3 pressed juice vendors in various areas of our market, but we did just admit somebody that collects greens from the farmers and has a gigantic Vitamix kind of grinding blender and grinds them up fresh on site. His product is very differentiated. It's not a pressed juice. It's a ground kind of green smoothie. And we still had room for that, even though we've got a lot of juice, because the differentiation was so extreme. Packaging and professionalism is part of the other P's. We have a 4P kind of thing that we look at when we're evaluating vendors, and packaging is one of them. Product is another, professionalism, personality. So we're looking for, it's a great product, but it's packaged in Ziploc bags. We had a granola vendor that came in the other day where it was definitely just stuck in a Ziploc bag. It wasn't correctly labeled. It needed work. And I could tell that what she wanted to charge as a price point was not going to work in that kind of packaging. So we supplied her with some information on different kinds of packaging options. We sent her some links to things. I think she's probably going to end up being a terrific vendor. Her product is good, The packaging is important. People buy with their eyes. They need to have some confidence that it's been packed in a way that's hygienic and then that it's attractive. That definitely attracts more sales. And then professionalism, we're evaluating things like, do they respond to email questions quickly? Did they complete the whole application, which to me is very important. So if they leave a lot of blanks on the application, it concerns me that their attention to detail may read later as leaving their tablecloth at home or not remembering to bring their banner or something like that. So just as when you're evaluating somebody that's applying for a job or to rent an apartment, filling in all those blanks is important. Being respectful of time and our team is important. So that kind of professionalism is what we're looking for. We're just looking for somebody that clearly is approaching this as a business and that expects to do this for at least some amount of time and that expects to make money at it. We don't look too much for hobbyists because we have so many people that make their living and support their families at our markets. So we're looking for somebody that's taking this seriously. That being said, and getting back to equity and dealing with different kinds of people, personality and positivity to me outweigh professionalism. So somebody that's got a terrific product, is clearly making an effort, is all about it and hungry and is really going to work hard at being a success, that to me is more important than having a level of professionalism that typically comes from experience. So a lot of new vendors come in and they're not very professional. And we sort of patiently explain to them, hey, if you take 6 weeks to answer my email, I may have already filled that spot. And we try to give them hints about just how to operate in that kind of environment where you're dealing with applications and you're dealing with permitting. You've got to fill out that whole permit application. You've got to fill in on the blanks or the health department's not going to respond to you. So somebody that's got personality and passion for their product, to me, outweighs the professionalism, something that I take into account, but something that I'm willing to overlook if I feel like they've got potential in other ways. And then we use, sometimes, certainly if you're responding to a committee or a group or a board about who you accept into the market. And I kind of joke sometimes that I do use this system, but sometimes I don't. I just go on gut because in our case, my organization is a benevolent dictatorship and I can accept whoever I want. I don't have to answer to a board. The nonprofits that we work with absolutely don't want anything to do with operations or evaluating vendors. They want us to manage it. So I can go on gut and say, hey, this person doesn't hit all these numbers, but they make sense to me. They feel like they're going to be a good addition to the market. But if you need to be a little more, makes it reportable for one thing. And also if you're just overwhelmed with applications and you need some help breaking it down, we find this little point system handy. And I'm going to, oh, I sure can't. I could drop a link in it. I'm going to unshare my screen for just a second so that we can do this. And then we're going to give you a link to this points matrix that we use. Okay, so there's the link. I'll go back to screen sharing in just one sec. You can pull that up on your computer. You can pull it up later. Back to sharing. So if you look at that link, it's got a point system on it. And what you can do with that document is this. You're set up at that link as a viewer. So anybody that has that link can look at that document as a viewer. If you want to use it, if you want to incorporate it, alter it in the ways that you need to into your own application system, evaluation system, you can do that by, how many people are familiar with Google Drive, which is sort of a fancy real life Excel live document. You can go up and copy that document, make a copy of it, and then that copy you will have editing capability on. And that way, not everybody who accesses that link can fill in all their information and confuse the other people looking at it. But it's a point system. The way we have ours set up, there's 35 maximum points available, and you get points for the quality of product, the quality of packaging, your availability, your level of differentiation between the market vendors and farmers that we already have. We give some points for minority ownership. So if the owners are a minority gender or race, that gets some points for us. You get points for how active you are on social media and promoting your own product, because that's going to bring value to the market. Anybody that's promoting their own product is promoting the market as a whole. So we give some points for that. So you can really codify this and make it a kind of numbers thing where you add up the points. And if you've got 3 people that just applied with granola, the one with higher points is going to get it. Now, what this doesn't work for is balancing your market. So it may be that all the granola vendors are great, but you don't have room for 3 granola vendors. You need a jam vendor in one of those spaces. So it won't always help you take an entire roster of applicants and figure out who's the best choice for you, but it will help you when you've got especially a lot of applicants in a particular category to kind of dig down to the nitty gritty and make it easy for anybody working with you to see why you chose one over the other. May have questions about that. Let me see if I can get to my chat again. Okay. Not too much yet. Okay, cool. So you can take a look at that off to the side if you're good at multitasking, or you can take a look at it after the presentation and talk. So we spend a lot of time in our team. I've got one relatively new assistant market manager that we're really trying to teach this to. That dialogue needs to be part of the evaluation process when you're considering a new application. So rather than just looking at the application, scrolling through it and saying, okay, they make granola, I'm going to go back to them now. We really want to start with research and looking at who they are, what they do, what their potential might be. So the first thing I do when I look at a vendor application is if they've got a website or social, I will go look around on it. And I'm looking not just for pictures of their product, but I'm looking for how they talk to people. And I'm looking for, is there any background information on where those recipes came from and how they're producing it? Again, rationalizing that if they can tell a story on their social, they can tell a story to customers of the market, and that will make them more successful. I look at, sometimes you'll look at social and things and you'll determine that somebody is not actually making their product, no matter what they said on their application, that it's very clear that it's a distributorship, and that's not something that we host. So there's a lot of things that you can get from kind of digging in, and that's where I usually start. If they don't have a social or website, I'll sometimes just search their business name, and sometimes you'll get some Yelp information that is either great or not so great. But I'll look around to see what kind of background that I can get that they forgot to put on there. Because a lot of people, when they're filling out any kind of application, start to feel intimidated and nervous, and they leave off all kinds of great information, or they think that it needs to be very rote and formal and professional, and so they don't let their personality come through. They're afraid to share that much. So I'm really looking for other ways that I can pick up information about how this person would add to the market, both their product and the way they operate and the respect they have for their customers and for fellow vendors and that kind of thing. And you can figure some of that out. I read between the lines on that. Sometimes we'll have somebody that sends us a story and says they had such and such an idea, but somebody stole it and now they're doing this instead. That makes me a little bit nervous. So I'm looking for maybe personality issues that they might have in working in a team, which a market absolutely is, versus being a sole proprietor sharing online. I try and get a feel for what makes sense for them. The first response I have to almost any application is questions. So I will get back to them and I'll thank them for applying, and I'll say, I notice here that you've been in these 3 markets. How long have you been there? Because nobody ever tells us that. That tells me a few things because I'm familiar with most of the markets in town. So I know that if they've been in X market for 9 months, they must show up on time, because I know that manager's not tolerant of people that don't. If they've been in such and such market, I know that they very likely don't have insurance and may or may not have a permit. And so I know that I need to ask more questions about that. So I'll ask a lot of clarifying questions, because people tend to leave things off of the application, no matter how specific your questions are. Because I want more information, I really want to get to know them. And because if I send them an email asking for clarification about things and asking questions about their product or their operations, I get a sense of how promptly they respond to emails. Because for us, we're constantly sending out vendor advisories and information about the market and space assignments and that kind of thing. I need to know whether or not this person reads their emails and do they respond to them in any kind of prompt way. So for me, somebody that never answers that or answers it 6 weeks later, that's a little bit of a red flag for me. I'm not sure they're going to operate successfully within our particular operation because we do so much communication back and forth. So sending those questions and seeing what kind of answers they get is really helpful. It's kind of like getting a cover letter with a resume. You can hire somebody to write that resume and make it look really good and make it very formal and professional, but the cover letter is going to say who you are. That's typically coming from you, especially if you ask them to include specific points in a cover letter. And so that when you start that dialogue back and forth with somebody on email, you start to get a better sense of who they are, what they're expecting from having a market business, what they expect the market to do for them, what they expect to be able to do for the market community. And there's a lot of ways to discover things that way. You can discover hidden talents that way that may make them into a differentiated vendor. So we have a lot of people that apply with baked goods. I don't know if you're in that situation where you are. I have talked to market managers all over the country that seem to be, so I'm going to guess that you do. We get a lot of baked good applications, and sometimes people will be so vague as to say, you know, what do you want to sell? And they'll say baked goods. And then we absolutely need to get back and say, that's a really, really big category. Are you making bread? Are you making cupcakes? Are you making scones? Tell us specifically what it is that you're making. And sometimes in the course of that dialogue, while we're going back and forth, we'll discover that they have the capability of doing something else. So we actually tell a story in our Vendor 101 online class. We had a vendor a few years ago that applied to us, and she made chocolate chip cookies and lemon bars and brownies, which is pretty much the most common baked goods that we get applications for. So it wasn't going to work. We were really full in that category. But we ended up asking her a lot of questions about what else she was famous for. What other recipe? Because she wanted to sell baked goods because her friends and family loved her cookies and brownies. We said, what else do they love? What else are you doing? And it turned out that she was the neighborhood pizza mom. She made a really good marinara sauce. She made pizza dough. Well, nobody was selling that at the market. And so we were able to work with her to kind of transfer what she had applied for. She had skills in baking. Turns out she had skills in making dough, and she's been a great vendor in terms of selling packaged pizza dough. That's an amazing market product, because if you're selling pizza dough, people can buy that and then walk across the aisle and buy basil, and they can buy cheese from our cheese vendor, and they can buy mushrooms to put on top of the pizza. So she's a really valuable market vendor, but it just never occurred to her to apply for that. She knew people liked her cookies and brownies. So that's awesome. I do see a question. Do you mass communicate with your vendors, email, text, or both? And Sage, you are absolutely correct. We just did a podcast episode on communicating with vendors. So we talked about what we do, and we also talked about other market managers. We interviewed, I think, 2 or 3 other market managers on how they communicate. We mostly do email. We text in emergencies, not too much more than that, but there are people that text very regularly with their vendors. So we're discovering hidden talents. A lot of times I'll ask somebody that's making cookies if they've ever made crackers, because we have a million dips at our markets, but we have nobody making crackers, and we have a lot of people making cookies. So talking back and forth with people and figuring out what they make, you can discover products that weren't necessarily on the application, but that could make them really, really successful. Oftentimes with prepared food vendors, people doing food and beverage to eat on site, which we don't have a lot of room for, I'll spend some time going back and forth with somebody that seems serious and find out if there's a special sauce that they use on their sandwich, or if there's injera bread that goes with their Ethiopian food. Do they have an interest in packaging that as a grocery product? And then we'll help them along with that. We'll refer them to the right places to get the permits that they need to do that. We'll make sure that they know the labeling that's required. And they can take something that they make that doesn't necessarily work at our market and may not work anywhere in the surrounding areas. We kind of know which categories are saturated. There's oftentimes something within that process that would translate to something that would be really successful for them. So we're always trying to find ways that we can make somebody successful, even if it's not the obvious way that they thought it was when they applied. I mentioned we watch for red flags, somebody that doesn't respond to emails, somebody that leaves a lot of information off, somebody that tells us that they're participating in a market and they're not, because we know market people, somebody that tells me that they're buying. We ask questions about what local ingredients you use, because our prepared food vendors and packaged food vendors need to use some level of local ingredients depending on what it is that they're selling. I sometimes have people respond that they're buying from X farmer that I know has not been in business for 3 years. So somebody that's not going to be truthful with me, that's going to inflate or actually give us misinformation about what they're doing, that's a big red flag for me. If they're doing it at the application process, they're probably going to do it down the line. That's probably not somebody that I'm going to consider a good part of my team. Occasionally we'll have somebody with such a good product that's doing that, that I'll have a mother-daughter talk with them and say, look, I've got concerns about this because you just said this, and that cannot be true. That farm's not in business anymore. So can you explain to me, are you getting that information from somebody else? Are you translating information from your dad or your brother and maybe missing something? We do give them opportunity, if I'm feeling like that, to maybe provide an explanation that will mitigate it. But we are also watching for red flags and things while we're going through applications. And then we discuss timing. A lot of times for us, we've got an open space, but because we're a year-round market, the goal is to keep those spaces full all the time. If they've got a great product, but they're not ready to start for 90 days, I have no idea if I'm going to have a space for you in 90 days. So a lot of times we have to have discussion in terms of timing. Why do you want to wait 90 days? Do they have other things going on and they can't start until then? Or did they hear through the grapevine that we have a 90-day wait list? Because there's all kinds of things that formulate in people's brains that have no basis in fact, but they get translated that way. So if they say they can't start right now, we want to ask why they can't start right now and see if there's something that we can adjust. If they absolutely can't, then we'll talk about, we'll keep an eye out. If there's an opening down the line, that'd be great. Contact us a couple of weeks before you're ready to start. Let's see. Okay, so Francis is saying, with the growing popularity of wild edibles and herbal products, how can a market ensure that a vendor has proper experience, knowledge, and wisdom in plant and mushroom identification? That's a good question. Yeah, and it gets deeper. If our market approves an application and accepts wildcraft or wild edible vendor, will their insurance cover any problems? Insurance could be an entire separate workshop. It's complicated and there's so much to it, but we'll address that lightly here in a sec. Does our market have any liability at all? The answer is yes. No matter what question you're asking about liability, yes, you have some. So I'm a big risk management person. I have been sued. I have a very large market. There are ways to mitigate that. You absolutely have liability. You're running a public event. If we receive a complaint about a vendor misidentifying plants and mushrooms, how do we best handle the situation? I would approach it them. So I guess this is not a question that I deal with a lot because California has such strict certification on what can be offered. And partly because our own policies, we don't host vendors with vitamins or supplements, and we are pretty careful about not hosting vendors that make specific medical claims to what they sell. I think it's a great thing. I think there's a lot of natural health available through plants and herbs and things, but since I can't verify it, and I really can't, I don't know enough about it, we discourage them from making those kind of claims. Absolutely, positively, if somebody has problems with illness or toxicity, they will sue the vendor. You do want to make sure that you've got an insurance certificate that indemnifies you. So they not only need to have general business liability insurance, it needs to call out specifically that your market is listed as an additional insured. It's different from a certificate holder. As I say, this could be a whole session, but you do need to make sure that their insurance indemnifies you, even though it does, if your farmer's market has more assets and more financial stability than that vendor does, which is very often the case, you could get sued. So we want to do things that make that less likely. I will tell you that I've never been sued or had any kind of issue where we got wrapped into anything regarding food safety or food toxicity or any of those things. We have gotten sued because people have tripped over tent legs, which is absolutely the most common kind of lawsuit and liability that comes up at farmers markets. It's really not usually about the food, which is something we have to explain regularly in the application process to people who sell things like pots for plants that want to know why they have to have insurance because they're not selling food and it couldn't poison anybody. That's not really the point. The point is if you're operating in a public space, there's a chance of you getting sued if somebody trips over something. And Francis, I'm just going to tell you, I would be really careful about that unless you've got somebody that really knows a lot about that. Wild edibles can be incredibly valuable and they can be dangerous if somebody is not good at what they do. It would be unlikely for me to host that kind of a vendor unless I had seen that they have pretty extensive experience in another venue or platform where they have good reviews and it seems to be working for them. That's a pretty tricky category. So if anybody else has input on that, feel free to plunge in. That's great, Amanda. Yeah, so the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit has really good information about risk management. We actually refer to them regularly on our podcast and in our education. They typically, we have somebody talking about risk management at the conference. And the folks at Vermont Law School who helped Farmers Market Coalition develop the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit and keep updating it, which is the terrific news, are really smart. And that particular toolkit is really, really valuable when you're talking about risk management and how to phrase things in your application and your acceptance emails that will mitigate some of that risk as well. Any other questions on the dialogue you want to have between vendors and you? I find that one of the most important parts of evaluating. You can definitely use that little chart that I linked you to that will give you a point system, but really getting to know somebody, because a farmer's market is such an unusual beast, and you have to not only have a product that you can sell and some sales ability and some finances to keep your business going, you also have to work so closely with others. You have to play well with other children in the other booths and the other tents, the other farms, and with the customers. So there's just a lot to get to know about someone to decide if they're going to be a successful vendor. And I find that dialogue is absolutely the best way to do it. So when you get to the point, what we do after that, and I'll tell you right before we get to accept or decline, if we go through the whole process and we're pretty sure we have a space for somebody, the next thing that we do is ask for product samples. And I know that not every market does this. I've had a lot of people say, just look really amazed when I tell them that we do that, but we don't typically accept products without a sample. And we are lucky in that we are in sort of a compound of, it's an informal shared work situation where we have an office and then there's 4 or 5 other businesses that have offices on the same property, and there's a seamstress and there's a graphic designer. So people that are not food people, but who are exactly the kind of people that would probably shop at a farmer's market at some point in their life. So when we have samples come in, we have a tasting panel that involves all of those people, not just our staff, that will then write a little note about whether they liked the taste and if there's anything about the packaging that concerned them and that kind of thing. So we do ask for samples, and that's the last thing we do before we accept or decline. We also use the sampling process in the same way that we use the email dialogue, which is one more way of seeing how responsible people are and what their presentation is. So when you're bringing us samples, you don't stay and give a presentation, but you do have to set a day and time to deliver your samples to our office. And so if somebody sets a day or time and they no call, no show and don't show up for that, and then call me 3 days later and say, oh yeah, I want to bring samples, that's a big concern to me. Are they going to do the same thing at a market? Are they not going to show up for a market that they have a reservation for? If they call and they're late because their car broke down, I get it, that's awesome. We'll reschedule their application process. If the next time, or their sampling process, if the next time they're doing to have samples, they've got another issue, their mom's sick, that she's got to take her to the doctor, and then that happens a third time, we start to think that maybe these folks don't have enough backup systems in life to make time commitments. And so that's a concern for us, because when they have a reservation at the market, obviously it's important to us that they show up on the day that they say they're going to be there, on time to open the market on time, all of those things. So we use the sampling process in 2 ways. One is to actually sample the product, make sure that we get a good response from people who would be potential shoppers. We check the labels on packaged products at that point, and oftentimes we will go back to somebody and say, this was great, everybody loved it. This label is not legal. You have to add net weight. You say on here that there's no fat in it. It's barbecue sauce. There's definitely fat in it. They don't have to have nutrition labeling, but if they have it, it's got to be accurate. We can definitely taste salt in this. There's no salt on your label. And a lot of times it's just a lack of knowledge about what legally needs to be on a product label. And we're able to go back to them, and then they have to resubmit the label before we would accept them to the market. So we find the sampling process really important. I know that it's time consuming, and you've got to have time in an office somewhere. You could have people bring samples to a market and find you there. We don't. Our markets are really busy, and we're dealing with customers and safety issues and traffic and all of those good things. So, and we don't feel like we can handle food effectively at the market. We're talking to EBT people, and that refrigerated product is sitting on the table. Not a good thing. So we do make them bring it to the office. And so I know it's a big commitment. It's a big time sink if you don't have much of a staff, or you're not in one place during the week where you can do that. I understand why people don't, but we find it really effective in terms of determining the potential success of a vendor that's coming in. Okay, so then you've gone, any questions on that? Sampling or Evaluating and talking to people. Nope, not so far. Okay, so then we get to accepting or declining an application. And certainly early in the process, some of those people fall out. You know, probably half of the folks that are applying, we just don't have room in that um, category, in which case we're going to refer them somewhere else if it looks like the product's good, or there's something about the way they're responding to emails, or there's something on their application that tells us that they're not ready to be in the market. So some of that we don't make it all the way to the sampling process, but a lot of times we do. So if we are going to accept somebody in the market, what we're going to do is we're going to send them a notification that says we have space for them with an offer expiration. So it's kind of like doing yeah, I don't know if any of you done formal job offers, but it's kind of the same thing. We have a space for you if you can be ready. A lot of times people are pending permits until they get accepted to a market. If you can be ready, if you can have your insurance certificate of coverage to us with the additional insureds on them, if you can have copies of your temporary food facility permit or your cottage food, if you can have your commissary agreement, if you can have this kind of list of documentation that we need to us by X date, which is typically 2 to 2.5 weeks in the future, we have a space for you. And we're very transparent during the application process that if you are offered a space, it's because we have a space now. And if you're not ready now, you need to get back to us when you are ready or when you're within 2 weeks of being ready, because we can't let a space sit empty. If somebody else in your category applies tomorrow and they're ready and you're 3 months out, we're going to fill it with them. If, you know, all things being equal in terms of product and professionalism, packaging, and all those good things, we're going to have to fill that space. We don't sit on empty space. That's not our job. So we do give them an offer expiration, give them a certain amount of time. Those are definitely negotiated and adjustable at sometimes. If we've got somebody with a terrific product, they're well differentiated, we know we need that product in the market, they have already got their sister's wedding planned and they're not going to be back in time to start in 2.5 weeks, but they could start the beginning of next month. We definitely have made those deals, but we do give them a parameter that this opening is available now if you can be ready by X date. And then we start the dialogue of whether that makes sense, whether they can be ready sooner, whether they need more time to get ready. So we do talk to them about that. We ask for an initial commitment when we accept vendors. So they have to commit to 6 consecutive weeks at the market. I'm not sure where those little yellow lines are. Can you guys see yellow lines on the screen? I don't know where those are coming from. It's interesting. We do ask for an initial commitment from new vendors. So they need to be able to commit to 6 consecutive weeks. At a brand new market, it's 12 consecutive weeks. And we're very clear with them that we expect them to make that commitment. We usually ask for the first week's rent and the 6th week's rent or the 12th week's rent up front. If they've ever made a commitment to us in the past and they haven't kept it, we may ask for the whole 6 weeks up front. That's atypical. It would only happen with a vendor that we think has really good potential, but that clearly doesn't understand the importance of a commitment. Your shoppers want to see, especially for a food product, your shoppers want to see those same people over and over. They arrive at the market with that food on their shopping list. They need to be there, or it reflects in frustration towards the whole market. So that initial commitment's important. It's important because of the customers, and it's also important for a new vendor, because I don't believe that a vendor can gauge the success of a market or whether or not they fit well into a market in a week or two. And a lot of people are inclined to say, oh, well, I'll pop into this market for 2 weeks, and if I'm not a raging success, I'm out. I'm going to go try another one. I don't think that's valid for them. Certainly not good for the market. It's not good for the vendor. That's not how you know if it's going to work or not. That first week, people are spotting you, but they've got their shopping list. They may or may not have money for an impulse buy. They're trying to get to know you. You're somebody that shows up in a tent on the street and then goes away. So there's some trust to be built. That second week, they may try a sample, may even buy a product. Then that customer may be out of town for a week, or their kid's sick and they miss a couple of weeks, and then they come back looking for you and you're not there. That's frustrating. And you have built a customer that, had you stuck with it over 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, you could be very successful. You cannot gauge that in 2 weeks. So we do require an initial commitment, both for the market's sake and for their sake. We, at that time, provide them with the market rules and guidelines and what their space rent is going to be, so they're fully aware of what it is that they would need to commit to. So you want to make sure they get that. We ask them if they've read it. We sometimes ask them what they think about X, again, just to see if they've read it. It's sort of like the brown M&M writer in the bands thing. So it's just to see if people are paying attention. So we make sure that they've read the rules, that they know what it's going to cost them to be there, that they can make a commitment. And if they haven't, again, all about dialogue. We will talk to them about, you can't commit for that long a period. Why not? Is it because you're going to be gone for 2 weeks for a long planned thing? Maybe you want to wait until you get back from that thing so that you can make a commitment, so that we can make sure that you get a good read on whether that market's good for you. I'm going to check on questions for just a second. How much do you charge for rent? It depends on the market. We have smaller and newer markets where we charge a flat $20 or $25 to a farmer. We may be charging $35 to $55 for a food vendor. At our very large market that's been open for 14 years and gets an average of 20,000 shoppers per Saturday, we charge anywhere from $40 for a farmer. And we do have a couple really tiny farmers that we charge less than that. But somewhere between $40 and $65 or $80 for a farmer, depending on how many tent spaces they're taking up, on up to as high as $150 or $175 for somebody selling food prepared to eat on site, or a craft vendor. So it varies. And they pay, so once upon a time, up until COVID, we collected from vendors at the market. We walked around and they gave us cash or checks, mostly cash, honestly. And we were carrying, it's a very large market. We were carrying an astounding amount of cash around on some days, and it was not a good thing. So we had talked for a long time about going to online billing. Figured that many of our farmers and really small food makers would not be able to cope with that. So we didn't do it. And then came COVID, and we had to. So we couldn't be handling a lot of, if you remember, back in early COVID days, we all thought that if you touch something, you get it. So we couldn't have people handling all that cash. We simply didn't have the staff because we had to, fence the market and count people in and out. And our staff were doing things other than going around and collecting that were more important. So we did initiate an online payment system. It happened that it was exactly the right time. And a large enough percentage of our vendors at this point have used a Square, or they've developed ways of doing other things online. 5 years ago, I think we would have had a big problem. The time that we did it, it works just fine. People have adjusted very easily to paying their invoices. We invoice via Square. They pay their invoice online. The rent is due prior to setup at the market. Some people are really busy and don't manage that. And if we know them and we've got faith in them and we have a relationship, we let them slide. And if they are too late too often, then we have that talk and say, you've got to pay on time. Some people are just really disorganized and are not good at looking at their invoices. And in that case, we usually suggest that they pay at the beginning of the month for the whole month. That saves them having to look at their email and make a payment every week. Many times they're into that. They're not late because they don't have the money. They're late because they're busy. They're making jam or kombucha or what have you. So that seems to work really well for us. So yes, in the old days when we collected on site, they were paying at some point before the end of the market. Right now they pay in advance or right around market date online. If you're charging a percentage based on sales, a lot of markets like that have to charge at the end of the market, or they bill people after the market, or you collect at the end of the market because you don't know what to charge them. We have flat rate markets, so that the amount is never going to change. So it doesn't make sense to have to wait until the end of the market to charge it. How do you add the Square usage fees to the vendor's fees? We just lose it. It's included in our cost of operations. We don't add it. It's in California, it is illegal to add a charge to somebody for using a credit card. In many states, it is not. You could do that if you wanted. It doesn't make sense to us to add the usage fee as a thing because we're going to require them to pay online. Now they can pay by ACH, which is where you put your bank account in instead of a credit card. Square charges us much less for that, and we do give a discount for that. But basically our fees include our cost of operations built into the fees. That includes credit card charges at this point. For us, because it was, especially at the very large market, we were pretty much able to mitigate the Square fees by the fact that we don't need to devote as much staff time to walking through that big market collecting money, and then staff time later counting actual cash and delivering it to the bank, feeling very afraid that you might get mugged on the way. So we were able to mitigate the credit card fees by reducing some staff time devoted to that. But I'm a big believer in credit card fees, and online fees and those kind of things are just a cost of doing business, and you wrap that into what you're charging for your product, which in our case is space fees, and make it work that way. Okay, thanks. All right. So that's how we accept somebody. Now, if we're not going to accept somebody, that's a whole different thing. And I think Amanda had told me last week that somebody had said, I want to know how to tell people they can't get in, because that can be hard. And my staff sometimes tells me that I am in the business of breaking hearts. And I try to not do that, or I try to not break them where they can't be patched back up at least. They say that largely because our Vendor 101 online class is designed to tell people right up front that there are two good outcomes for the class. They will either come out of the class excited about joining a farmer's market, knowing how to structure their business to protect themselves, how to finance it so that they don't get in trouble during the startup phase, all the permits that are required, what they need on their labels to be legal, all of that good stuff. That's a good outcome. And then the other completely good outcome is that they go through all that and they find out that even though you pop up tents, it's not camping and you can't just do it any which way, and it's not casual and it's expensive. It's much more expensive to start a business than you might think if you've never done it. And so the day job sounds like it's not so bad after all, and that's way too much work, and they don't want to go forward into a farmer's market business. And that's also an excellent outcome. It's good to know that before you spend up half your life savings or devote a year or two of your life to doing something that is not for you. So those kind of broken hearts I'm proud of. It's good. We try to do it gently. And so the same thing when you're declining a vendor. If you just don't have room for them, but you think it's a terrific product and they've handled the application process professionally and they seem like somebody that you might want to work with in the future, I mean, the easiest way is just to tell them we're full in that category. Now, that's not something you want to surprise them with after you've done the entire application process and had them bring samples and all that. You've been wanting to have that dialogue all the way through the application process. We really don't have room in your category right now. Happy to go further and get you pre-qualified in case we do ever have space. But you don't want them to devote a lot of time to the whole application process and the dialogues with you and heaven forbid, delivering samples that are going to cost them time and money if you know that you don't have room for them. So we're very, very transparent about that all the way through the process. And then we tell them a number of things. We are very clear about why we're not accepting somebody. So terrific product. We just have too many vendors that are in a similar category to you and I don't have room for that. It would throw my market out of balance. Or terrific product, it's not the kind of thing we carry. We don't carry things that very specifically make medicinal claims, health claims. Great product, not exactly our vibe. I don't think I have had, especially artists apply to me and I'll tell them, this is beautiful. Our shoppers won't buy it. I have enough experience with it to know that that's not something that's going to appeal to the shoppers at this market. It might appeal to a shopper at this other market in this other neighborhood, but it's probably not going to work well here. I will admit that every once in a while we're wrong. I have accepted products against my better judgment that I did not think would appeal to our shoppers and they loved it. So I'm also transparent about that. If it's imports, we don't take imports, even if they're fair trade, most likely. Every once in a while, we've got a real lifestyle oriented non-food that's a fair trade product that we will sometimes take, but I will tell them that's just not something we carry. We're very oriented to locally produced. And then what I usually try to do is two things. One, if it looks to us like a great product and we just don't have room for it, we try to leave that door open. We try to be extremely nurturing and telling them that we just don't have room for it. We tell them all the good things about their product. We tell them things that maybe could differentiate it if they're interested. We don't want to design their business, but if they're interested in making this or that change, that could create a space for them in our market. We oftentimes refer people to other markets that we know have more space in a category than we do. I know that hopefully y'all are at the stage where you know that we don't compete against other farmers markets. We compete against big box grocery stores when it comes to customers. That's very much my feeling. But certainly in terms of vendors, every market feels a little bit like they're competing against another market because farmers and vendors can only do so many and you want yours full. But we very often refer vendors that we can't host to another market or to another type of market. I think I mentioned earlier, we will refer especially craft vendors or a prepared food vendor to markets that are vegan pop-ups once a month that are great markets. They're just not available every week. Or we'll refer them to a maker's market that really concentrates on locally made crafts and clothing and cards and things. So we'll refer them somewhere that they can keep going. And we let them know, hey, feel free to check back with us. We're going to keep your application on file. If something pops up, we'll definitely get back to you to see if you're still available. If you want to check with us, please don't email us every week. If something changes in a week, I'll let you know. But if you want to check in with us every 3 or 4 months or every year, by all means, pop me a quick email and ask if anything's changed. And I can use a memory nudge every once in a while myself. So that is how we let them down. I have also had to tell people, hey, our tasting panel, you look great, the packaging's great. Our tasting panel tried it. Every single person, or 7 out of 8 thought it was too salty. And I think you're gonna have a hard time selling it. And I definitely think you're gonna have a hard time selling it more than once. I think people are gonna buy it, they're gonna be unhappy, and they're not gonna come back. And that is not the way to build a successful business. So I have been very transparent with people that we like their product overall, but it needs a change for us to predict success. And that if they think about it and they want to come back, we're happy to look at it. If they've made a change to their product or their business and they want to reapply, we're definitely open to that. Some folks were not, but a lot of times we'll see that kind of product. We had somebody with a bone broth, beautiful bone broths and vegetable broths and things, but they were selling it in very lightweight cellophane containers. And it was absolutely without a doubt going to be a product that you set in a reusable market bag over your shoulder and it spills onto everything in your bag and would drive customers crazy. So we said, great product, you got the label right, it won't sell in this package at a farmer's market. You could maybe sell it in a deli, you know, in a good quality deli. And then they came back a year later with their product reformatted into kind of a mason jar thing, and were a very successful vendor for a long time. So it's nice when people hear you and can make those little adjustments that will make them a success. Do I have any resources on hiring a market manager? I've got an ad running right now, and I'm not having much fun at it right now. Hiring is tough out there. I wish I did have a resource for it. We have just, for our market assistants, we don't often use Good Food Jobs. We find that it doesn't return a lot of folks. We post it on our own social media. We put it in our newsletters. We find success probably as much as anything for a market assistant, which is kind of just our general team member. They're not doing data entry. They're not doing invoicing and things. They're working at the market, processing EBT sales, talking to vendors, helping set up, that kind of thing. We find actually that a sign at the info booth is extremely valuable. It took us a long time to occur to us that would be a good idea, but we found it very helpful in hiring market assistants. I find Good Food Jobs a good resource for kind of higher level staff. If you're trying to hire an exec director, you're trying to hire a manager that's going to be covering a couple of markets or doing a lot of back end data and things, that can be a good way to generate people. I will tell you, it's hard out there. I talk to a lot of market managers because we have a private Facebook group for farmers market participants that's mostly managers probably, and I'm in a leadership forum for Farmers Market Coalition, so I talk to a lot of folks that are running multiple markets, and it is just tough out there hiring. There's a lot of jobs available, and not just in farmers markets, but in related fields like hospitality and retail, event management, and it's tough where we are. Oh yeah, and a good job description is key. I will say in terms of resources on hiring a market manager, especially nowadays, because so many people are hiring and there just aren't enough staff folks to go around. The more information you put in your ad, the better. So it does not work anymore to talk about how fun it is to work there, but not mention salary and not mention schedules. Where in the old days, what that would get you is a lot of applicants who may or may not be right for you because you didn't give them enough information. Nowadays, you just won't get applicants if you do that. They have too many other places to apply. Yes, our private group is on Facebook. As soon as I stop sharing my screen, I will post a link to that. You can join. You do have to answer the 3 qualifying questions. So if you pop in there and just put your name and don't say how you're connected to farmers markets and don't agree to the respectful rules, we will not accept you. It is on Facebook. I wish it was somewhere else, but that seems to be where everybody hangs out. I've thought about putting it on Mighty Networks or somewhere, but yes, I'll pop a link in there. Oh yeah, and Amanda's saying they'll share your job announcements if you send them to us, so that could be really effective. I'm going to make this really quick because we're almost at the end of our time, but we consider education a really important part of the application process. It saves our managers time in terms of dealing with somebody at the market that's not really ready for a market. It minimizes your investment in applicants that will not eventually develop into a real vendor, and that it just increases the business success of those potential vendors if you educate along the way, and if you either refer to a program like ours, Vendor 101, or if you set up your own vendor applicant education program. So that can be really, really helpful to you. We oftentimes get people that have a great idea and are really excited and passionate about what they do, but just don't have the business education. And so we strongly suggest trying to educate people as you go. This is ours. That's the Vendor 101 program. We started that program specifically to save our staff's time because we were spending so much time processing applications from people that just really weren't ready. And we get a lot of applications, especially because we have one really big market, and it was just taking up a crazy amount of staff time. So now they can sign up there, learn how to be a vendor. That's actually been reformatted as an online course that's good for people in all areas. So if you want to refer them to there, you can. The other things we do are Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, and the Intense Conference. This is my core team. That's Bridget and me and Justine. At a market, of course, where we always are. And our whole goal is for passion to meet profit. And I'm happy